Jung warned that spiritual growth doesn't strengthen your relationships. It destroys them first, and only some of them rebuild into something real. You've probably noticed it already. The more work you do on yourself, the more distant your relationships feel. Your family asks, "What's wrong with you?" Your friends stop inviting you places. Your partner says, "You've changed," like it's an accusation. This isn't happening because you're doing something wrong. It's happening because you're doing something right. Jung observed this pattern in every patient who underwent what he called individuation, genuine psychological growth. And he identified exactly why transformation threatens relationships and which ones are worth fighting to rebuild versus which ones you need to release. The first thing destroying your relationships isn't obvious, and understanding it will change how you see every conflict you're currently experiencing. The participation mystique breaking. 1913. Carl Jung began a period of intense psychological work that would fundamentally change his understanding of human relationships. But what his family experienced during those years reveals something you're living through right now. His wife Emma wrote to a friend, "Carl has become a stranger. He sits at dinner but isn't present. He looks at me but doesn't see me. I've lost my husband to something I cannot name." His children described feeling like they had to tiptoe around their own home. His colleagues at the hospital whispered concerns about his mental state. Everyone in his life experienced his transformation as abandonment, even though Jung was more present to himself than he'd ever been. What was actually happening? He was breaking what Jung called participation mystique, the unconscious psychological fusion that binds families, friendships, and partnerships together. Here's what you need to understand. Most of your relationships aren't based on who you actually are. They're based on unconscious agreements about who you'll pretend to be. Your family has a role for you: the responsible one, the funny one, the caretaker, the problem. Your friends have an image of you: the adventurous one, the stable one, the one who never judges. Your partner has needs you fulfill: emotional support, financial security, status validation, distraction from their own issues. These aren't conscious negotiations. They're unconscious fusions where everyone's psyche becomes entangled with everyone else's, creating what I call a psychological container that feels like connection but is actually codependence. Dr. Murray Bowen's research on family systems confirms this. Families operate as emotional units where individual differentiation is experienced as threat. When one person begins genuine individuation, the entire system experiences anxiety because the unconscious fusion is breaking. Modern neuroscience explains the mechanism. Social connection activates the same neural networks as physical. Pain relief. We're literally addicted to unconscious fusion because it soothes our nervous systems. When you break that fusion through growth, others experience it as withdrawal from a drug they didn't know they were taking. The critical realization. Your relationships aren't being destroyed by your transformation. Your becoming authentic is revealing that these relationships were built on unconscious agreements that no longer serve anyone involved. Jung wrote to a patient in 1916, "The pain your family feels at your transformation is not caused by you becoming yourself. It's caused by them losing the version of you that allowed them to remain unconscious about themselves." If you've been told by family or friends that you've changed and they want the old you back, comment, "They sensed the change before I announced it." This breaking creates 3 specific relationship patterns. Understanding which pattern dominates your relationships will save you years of confusion and unnecessary guilt. The 3 relationship patterns. Pattern 1, the projector. Jung treated a woman in 1920, let's call her Anna, who came to him in crisis. Her mother hadn't spoken to her in 6 months, and Anna couldn't understand why. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd simply started therapy, begun painting again after 20 years, and set a boundary around Sunday dinners. Through analysis, Jung uncovered something devastating. Anna's mother had unconsciously projected her own unlived artistic life onto Anna. When Anna was young and showed artistic talent, her mother encouraged it obsessively, not to support Anna, but to vicariously live the creative life she'd abandoned when she married. But Anna had actually become an accountant, living a conventional life that matched her own temperament, not her mother's fantasy. When Anna finally started painting in her 40s on her own terms for her own reasons, her mother experienced it as betrayal. Why? Because Anna's genuine artistic expression shattered the projection. The mother couldn't live vicariously through Anna anymore. She had to face her own unlived life. This is pattern 1. The projector unconsciously needs you to carry parts of themselves they've rejected. Your development forces them to reclaim those parts which feels unbearable. Eleanor Roosevelt's transformation illustrates this perfectly. When she began developing her own political voice separate from Franklin's career, her mother-in-law Sarah experienced it as personal attack. Sarah had projected her own thwarted political ambitions onto Eleanor's role as dutiful political wife. Eleanor's letters from this period reveal the pattern. The more I become myself, the more Mother Roosevelt treats me as enemy. I'm doing nothing to her, yet she experiences my independence as aggression. The projection wasn't malicious, it was unconscious. Sarah didn't consciously think, I'll use Eleanor to live my political dreams. But her psyche did it anyway, and Eleanor's individuation shattered that arrangement. You have projectors in your life right now. The parent who gets anxious when you make choices they wouldn't make. The friend who seems threatened when you succeed in ways they haven't. The partner who loved your potential but resents your actual development when it differs from their fantasy. Projection identification technique. When someone reacts emotionally to your transformation, ask yourself, what part of themselves might they have projected onto me? What unlived life am I carrying for them? This isn't about analyzing them. It's about understanding the dynamic so you can stop absorbing their emotional reaction as if it's about you. Their discomfort is about their relationship with themselves, not your relationship with them. You can't fix a projector relationship by explaining yourself or defending your choices. Projection is unconscious. They literally cannot see what they're doing. Your only options are maintain boundaries while they do their own work, accept limited contact where projection doesn't dominate, or end the relationship when projection is so severe that connection is impossible without betraying yourself. The hardest truth: you cannot grow and maintain their projection. Choose one. Pattern 2. The Guardian. Dr. Harriet Lerner studied couples where one partner entered therapy or began serious self-development work. In 40% of cases, the non-developing partner either increased addictive behaviors, created crisis through affairs or financial risks, or escalated conflict by picking fights and threatening divorce. Why? Because one person's consciousness destabilizes unconscious equilibrium. Jung documented this pattern in marriage dynamics, observing that many partnerships unconsciously function as mutual unconsciousness pacts, agreements where both people stay small, so neither has to face their own depths. He treated a couple in the 1930s where the husband had begun intensive self-work after a health crisis. As he changed, becoming more emotionally expressive, questioning his career, developing spiritually, his wife became increasingly hostile. She'd say, "I married a rational man, not this emotional stranger. Your spiritual seeking is self-indulgent. You're becoming someone I don't recognize." Analysis revealed that the wife had unconsciously chosen a husband who was emotionally shut down because it allowed her to avoid her own emotional depths. His rationality was her shield. His transformation threatened to expose her to feelings she'd spent decades avoiding. This is pattern 2. The guardian unconsciously needs you to stay unconscious so they can remain unconscious about themselves. Your evolution is a mirror reflecting what they're avoiding in themselves. You're dealing with a guardian when they were attracted to qualities you're now changing. They sabotage your development efforts, or they threaten abandonment if you don't go back to normal. The conscious invitation approach, the only ethical path with a guardian, is transparent invitation. I'm changing because I'm growing into who I actually am. I'd love for you to join me in this journey. If you're not interested, I respect that, but I won't abandon myself to maintain our status quo. Then watch their response. Some guardians wake up and begin their own work. Most decline, but eventually respect your boundary, requiring you to renegotiate relationship terms. But many escalate conflict to force you to choose them or yourself. And that choice requires ending the relationship. The most painful truth. Many relationships exist precisely because both people are avoiding growth. When one person breaks that agreement, the relationship cannot survive unless the other person also chooses consciousness. Pattern 3. The mirror. Have you noticed that certain people seem uncomfortable around you even when you're not saying anything judgmental? That friends stop calling without explanation? That your presence creates awkward silence you can't quite explain? This is the most subtle pattern because it doesn't involve malice or even unconscious manipulation. It's simply the inevitable result of what I call frequency mismatch. Jung attended a dinner party in 1955 and described the experience in a letter. Perfectly pleasant people, intelligent conversation, good food, and I felt profoundly alone. Not because they rejected me, but because I could see dynamics they could not. He watched the host's repressed anger at his wife leak through jokes. He watched the wife's unconscious seduction of male guests to get the attention her husband withholds. He watched guests project their shadows onto each other while believing they were having sophisticated discourse, all invisible to them, blindingly obvious to him. This is pattern 3, the mirror. Your consciousness reflects their unconsciousness back to them, and they experience your presence as uncomfortable judgment even when you're not judging. Research on highly sensitive people confirms this experience. People who process information more deeply often report feeling alienated not because they reject others, but because depth of perception without shared context creates unbridgeable distance. You're experiencing the mirror pattern when people say you make them uncomfortable but can't explain why. When you feel exhausted by surface conversation, or when you can see relationship dynamics others insist don't exist. Selective participation. Jung's solution was what he called dosing exposure, strategic engagement followed by withdrawal for integration and recovery. He maintained relationships with unconscious people in his life, but limited contact to sustainable doses. Family dinners kept short, colleague interactions kept professional, social events attended selectively with planned exit strategies. He also created his temenos, sacred space where consciousness could exist without compromise. His tower at Bollingen wasn't escape from the world. It was necessary refuge for maintaining consciousness in a largely unconscious world. The critical distinction. Healthy withdrawal is temporary for integration and recovery, maintains key relationships at sustainable levels, and includes actively seeking conscious community. Unhealthy isolation is permanent, avoids all challenge, cuts off all relationships, and creates rigid us-them mentality. Jung withdrew to his study daily. He didn't abandon his family. He took walks alone. He didn't exile himself from society. He limited social obligations. He didn't become a hermit. If you've noticed that your presence alone makes certain people uncomfortable, even when you're not saying anything judgmental, comment, "I don't judge, I just see clearly." But which of these patterns dominates your relationships? And more importantly, which relationships can transform and which ones need to end? Relationship death and rebirth. Here's the truth that will hurt. Not all relationships are meant to survive your transformation. In 1918, during his most intense period of psychological work, Jung wrote in his journal, "I have discovered that some relationships were never real connections between authentic selves. They were agreements between false personas to maintain mutual unconsciousness. When one persona dies, the relationship dies, not as tragedy, but as natural completion. Some of the relationships you're trying to save can't be saved because they were never built on authentic foundation. They were built on who you pretended to be, meeting who they pretended to be, sustained by mutual agreement to never look too closely at either person's depths. Your becoming real isn't destroying genuine connection. It's revealing that genuine connection never existed. The relationship inventory. For each important relationship, ask, does this person know who I actually am? Not who they think I am, who I actually am when I'm alone with myself. Can this person tolerate my authenticity when I'm real, expressing needs, setting boundaries, sharing my actual thoughts? Do they move toward me or away? Do they also seek consciousness? Are they doing their own inner work? Or do they need me to stay unconscious so they can avoid theirs? Jung's patient Anna did this inventory with her mother relationship. The answers destroyed her fantasy. Her mother didn't know her actual self, only the projection. Her mother could not tolerate authenticity. Every authentic expression created conflict. Her mother had no interest in consciousness, saw self-examination as self-indulgent. Anna mourned the relationship for 2 years. Not the relationship that existed, but the relationship she'd hoped could exist. Jung guided her through this grief, helping her see that mourning the fantasy was necessary to release it. She eventually moved to limited contact, holiday visits, surface-level updates, no expectation of genuine connection. Anna's mother experienced this as abandonment. Anna experienced it as self-preservation. Big moment. Some relationships are meant to end, and honoring that ending is sacred, not selfish. Jung's own relationship with Sigmund Freud illustrates this. They had profound connection, intense collaboration, genuine affection. But as Jung individuated, developing ideas that diverged from Freud's theories, Freud experienced it as betrayal. Freud couldn't tolerate Jung's intellectual independence without seeing it as personal rejection. Jung couldn't suppress his authentic development to maintain Freud's approval. The relationship had to end. Jung wrote years later, "I had to choose between Freud's affection and my own soul. I chose my soul. That choice cost me professionally, socially, personally. But the alternative, betraying my own truth to maintain a false connection, would have cost me everything." You're facing similar choices right now. The friend who only relates to you through shared complaints. The family member who needs you to play a role. The partner who wants you to be who you were, not who you're becoming. Framework for relationship decisions. Some relationships need to transform or be released. These are projectors and guardians who refuse their own work. These cannot survive in current form. Some can be renegotiated. People who are unconscious but not actively blocking your evolution. These continue at limited levels with reduced frequency and specific boundaries. Some deepen through conscious partnership where both people are committed to their own development. These become more intimate because meeting authenticity creates real connection. And you'll need to actively build conscious community, new relationships with people, also doing inner work. These become your primary support system, the hardest pill to swallow. Most of your current relationships fall into the first 2 categories. Very few are the third. You'll need to actively create the fourth. Conscious relationship closure. When a relationship must end, do it consciously. Acknowledge what was real, release the fantasy. Take responsibility for your part. Make clean closure if possible. Complete the mourning. Unprocessed relationship endings create what I call psychic debris that contaminates future relationships. You bring the ungrieved loss into every new connection until you complete the mourning. But here's the paradox. The more authentic you become, the fewer relationships you need. Quality replaces quantity. One conscious friendship becomes more nourishing than 10 unconscious ones. After the death comes something you've never experienced: genuine conscious connection. Building conscious relationships. Jung developed what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradoxes without resolving them into simple either-or choices. Applied to relationships, it means you can be fully yourself and deeply connected, but only with people who are also fully themselves. Unconscious relationships operate on fusion. I need you to complete me. Conscious relationships operate on wholeness. I'm complete, and so are you. And we choose connection between two complete beings. Let me show you what this looks like. A man came to Jung after his divorce in 1925, convinced he'd failed at relationship. Through analysis, he discovered that the marriage was built on unconscious complementarity. He was strong, she was weak, he was rational, she was emotional. But these weren't their actual natures. They were roles they'd unconsciously agreed to play. When he began therapy and discovered his own emotional depth, when she began developing her own strength, the complementary arrangement collapsed. Jung told him, "Your marriage didn't fail. It succeeded at its unconscious purpose, mutual avoidance of wholeness. Now you have the opportunity for something far more challenging and far more real, a relationship between two whole people." 3 years later, the man entered a new relationship. This time, both partners did individual therapy. Both had separate friendships and interests. Both could tolerate the other's full emotional range. Both took responsibility for their own triggers. Both saw the relationship as enhancement, not completion. Jung noted this relationship has conflict. Conscious conflict where each person claims their truth without needing the other to validate it. The difference? After conflict, they're closer, not more distant. Consciousness creates real intimacy. What makes conscious relationship possible? First, differentiation. You know where you end and they begin. Research on couples shows that high differentiation creates higher satisfaction and stability. Why? Because each person takes responsibility for their own emotional state, rather than making the other responsible for regulating them. Second, authentic revelation. You show up as you actually are, not as you think they want you to be. This requires courage because it risks rejection. But the paradox? Only authentic revelation creates the possibility of being truly seen and therefore truly loved. Third, shadow tolerance. You can hold space for their darkness without needing to fix it. They can witness your shadow without being threatened by it. Both people understand that wholeness includes difficult emotions and parts of self that society deems unacceptable. Fourth, conscious conflict. You fight cleanly, naming the actual issue, taking responsibility for your triggers, seeking understanding rather than victory. Conflict becomes opportunity for deeper knowing rather than evidence of incompatibility. Practical integration. The authenticity audit weekly. Identify one moment where you performed rather than being real. What were you afraid would happen if you were authentic? The boundary practice. Set one small boundary each week that feels uncomfortable. Notice most people respect clear boundaries, the ones who don't reveal themselves as incompatible with conscious relationship. The conscious community cultivation. Actively seek people doing similar inner work, therapy groups, depth psychology communities, authentic relating circles, places where consciousness is valued, not pathologized. You cannot maintain individuation in isolation. You need what I call the community of the conscious. Others who have also chosen the difficult path of becoming real. Finding this community requires showing up authentically, being willing to be the first to be vulnerable, prioritizing depth over surface connection, and accepting that this community will be small because consciousness is rare. Big moment. The most radical act in relationship is choosing to be completely yourself and inviting others to meet you there, knowing most won't, and accepting that reality without bitterness. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's closest colleague, described their professional relationship as model of conscious connection. They could disagree intensely about psychological theories without either person experiencing it as personal rejection. They could challenge each other's ideas without defending their egos. They could collaborate for decades without fusion or dependency. She wrote, "Our relationship worked because neither of us needed the other to validate our existence. We chose connection between two whole people, not fusion between two halves. This is what becomes possible after your transformation destroys unconscious relationships. The opportunity for connections you've never experienced because you've never been whole enough to co-create them. If you've reached the point where you can maintain your truth in relationships without needing others to validate it, comment, 'I see you, but I don't need you.' Even conscious people fall into one trap that destroys everything they've built, the inflation trap and integration. Jung identified a pattern that destroys people even after successful individuation. Spiritual inflation. This is where consciousness becomes superiority. Evolution becomes elitism, and you lose relationships, not because others are unconscious, but because you've become unbearable. The pattern. Someone undergoes genuine transformation, accesses real psychological depth, develops actual consciousness. Then their ego appropriates these experiences and inflates. I'm awakened, and they're asleep. I see truth, and they live in illusion. You've probably met this person. They've done the work, had the insights, developed real capacity, but they wield their consciousness like a weapon. They can't have ordinary conversations without pointing out others' unconsciousness. They create a hierarchy with themselves at the top. This isn't consciousness. It's ego appropriating consciousness to feel special. Inflation warning signs. You feel superior to people still asleep. You can't participate in ordinary life without contempt. You refuse feedback from unconscious people. Your development isolates you completely. Nietzsche's Descent illustrates inflation destroying someone with genuine philosophical depth. His late letters show progression from insight to inflation. Signing letters, Dionysus, claiming to be reborn, seeing himself as world historical figure. His consciousness was real. His inflation destroyed his capacity to relate to anyone, leaving him completely isolated before his psychological collapse. Jung himself briefly became inflated after his intense psychological work in the 1920s. Emma Jung confronted him. "Carl, you've become insufferable. Your insights are real, but you're wielding them like status rather than sharing them as gifts." Jung later wrote, "My wife saved me from inflation by refusing to worship at the altar of my supposed enlightenment. She loved me enough to tell me I was being an ass." The antidote. Practice eternal beginner's mind. Regularly acknowledge how much you don't know. Maintain ordinary relationships with people who keep you grounded. Welcome challenges to your worldview without defending. Do anonymous service where no one knows it was you. Regularly engage with people and situations that humble you. When you notice inflation. At 80, Jung wrote, "I know more than I did at 20, but I'm more aware of how little I actually know. The wisest thing I can say after a lifetime of psychological work is I don't know." The integrated relationship stance. I have done deep psychological work that most people haven't done. This doesn't make me better than them. It makes me capable of different things and unable to relate in certain ways. My job is not to make them like me or agree with me. My job is to maintain my consciousness without needing them to validate it, and to offer presence without needing them to understand it. This is the final integration. You're fully yourself. You're deeply connected where conscious connection is possible. You're boundaried where it's not. You're neither superior nor diminished. You're simply real, relating consciously to a largely unconscious world without bitterness about that reality. The practical daily balance. Some time in conscious community for nourishment. Some time in ordinary interaction for grounding. some time alone for integration. All of it done with awareness that your consciousness is gift and responsibility, not status or achievement. Jung's final insight: the privilege of individuation is discovering who you truly are. The price is that fewer people can meet you there. The wisdom is accepting that price without making others wrong for being unable to pay it. Your spiritual growth is destroying your relationships. Some of them need to be destroyed. Some of them can transform. All of them will reveal whether they were ever real to begin with. The question isn't how to avoid destroying relationships through transformation. The question is, are you willing to become real and let the relationships that can't tolerate reality fall away? Trusting that conscious connections will emerge in the space you've created. Most people choose comfortable unconsciousness over lonely consciousness. They go back to sleep, return to performance, abandon their authenticity to maintain relationships built on lies. Jung spent his life studying the ones who don't, who choose truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, wholeness over approval. He discovered they don't just survive the destruction of their relationships. They thrive in the conscious connections that become possible once unconscious ones end. Your relationships are being destroyed right now. Not randomly, but systematically, revealing which connections were real and which were arrangements of mutual unconsciousness. This is the most painful and most necessary part of becoming who you actually are. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.